So I hope screen is now visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Ah, okay. So basically, we would like to know once we prepare the sample, what sort of measurements we can make, and what are the softwares which we can use. So first step in the analysis is that we want to be sure that the sample we have prepared is the same which we have planned, or if not, what else we have prepared, that we would like to know. And for that, it's XRD matching is very handy. In this case, what we do, we take X-ray diffraction pattern of our sample and try to match it with the standard pattern. So at with good instruments, in fact, there are built-in programs, you know so that once XRD pattern is obtained, then there is huge database available, either online or stored on the computer, and then that program will match. So it will search among the available files, and then it will show the best match for your pattern. Now, quite often, such programs are a bit costly, and many a times you may not get entire matching, but people will be happy to just give you the data either in form of a comma separated Excel file or a text file and so on. So if it is text file, we will still welcome it. So in this case, then what we have to do, we have to exert ourselves and then do the matching. So for newcomers, I will show how I have done it. This is not the only way. You can follow any method that you have, and if you are lucky enough, you will get the matched XRDs. So far so good. So what I will usually follow is something like this. I will just show whatever I have done recently. So recently we have had some XRDs taken, and we have tried to match them. So this sort of file we took. So what I had done is, whatever data I obtained as from the XRD, so this was a sort of text file. So I just copied it and pasted this in the Excel. So this was done. This data is quite huge. So some 3,500 readings, and all this data was given to us. So here, this is the angle and this is the intensity. So what we can do is, we can also normalize this data. So here what I have done, I wanted to compare this data. So this data I have chosen between 100 to 200. And then the standard data I have taken from a file. So this file I have taken from ICDD. And then whatever lines are there, these lines I entered manually. So from the standard file, this was the data, this is the angle, and this is the relative intensity. So in order to get vertical line, what I do, I plot each line 0 to 100, then intensity was 11.4. So same thing, then 0, 11.4. So I'll get a vertical line with intensity 11.4 and so on and so forth. So this data I have obtained from ICDD file. Now in this case, in fact, this belong to NABA SCSI 207. So as I showed you yesterday, I can search for NABA SCSI 207 and then get a file. And from that file, I obtained this data. Let me see if I have got that file here, or I have directly entered. Yes, this was the file which I obtained from the XRD center. And this was the file, right? So from ICDD data, I got this file, 2 theta and intensity, 10.62 and so on and so forth. So I chose this file. In fact, I can convert this table into Excel also, or if not, then just I will scan this column and put them in the Excel. So same thing I have put in Excel. So from ICDD data, I copied the data and pasted in Excel. Now once I do that, I can plot this in Excel. I can choose this like this, and I can plot this in Excel. So I can get a graph or something like this. And then I can compare that this is the standard data and this is my data. So whether it matches or not. So I find that there is fairly good matching. Intensity in this case is low, so crystallinity was a bit poor. But if we get good crystallinity, then we get good matching. Often we are not so lucky, we may not get pure phase. Then I have to find out what sort of impurity phase is there. So first step, is to identify the compound. So many times we are not all that lucky. Yes. So we can make comparison also by making transparent graph and so on and so forth. So this blue line is the octane data, and these red lines, this is the NAMGF3. From ICDD data, I obtained this file. So again, this is what I did. This is the data obtained from the center, and then I just plotted it. I normalized it to values between 100 and 200, and then the standard data, I have put it like this from that ICDD file 1303. So this data was put here, and then I made this type of chart, and then I superposed both, and this is what I get. So again, I find that there is a good comparison and there is quite a good matching. So this way I can match the obtained data with the standard data, and if the matching is good, it's okay. Now in this case, you'll find that this line is very high, right? And this line relative intensities are not matching all that. So we have to remember that whenever we take powder diffraction pattern, it is assumed that all planes are randomly distributed. But this assumption may not be true. If you are preparing sample, there might be grain growth, and in particular direction that growth may take place. So what we have to ensure is that we thoroughly grind the sample and very fine powder we send for the XRD analysis. So that is quite important, you know. Now, after I mean, this is just a qualitative way of speaking that match is good and it is not good and so on, isn't it? So best way is to do some quantitative analysis, and that quantitative analysis is what is known as the Rietveld refinement. Basically what we do in Rietveld refinement, we compare the difference from point to point, difference between the standard data and our data, and then we square these differences, and then we vary the lattice parameters, etc., and the atomic positions, so that the by least square fit method, so that when we add all these squares, then this sum we minimize, and this minimization is done in terms of several parameters like ABC, angles theta, and so on and so forth. So there is a software, Foolproof. So this is freely available software, so you can download that and install it. So basically, such software is used for the Rietveld refinement. And once we get Rietveld refinement, you know, then that is a quantitative way. In fact, in our group, Rupesh has done this Rietveld refinement. Also, Priya Tundam, she also has done it quite well. So you can take help of these people, and on campus, Dr. Palikunwar, he is also an expert in this Rietveld refinement. Now, what this Rietveld refinement looks, in fact, this gives you quantitatively what is the goodness of fit parameters. So this we can obtain, you know. I will show you some examples of Rietveld refinement, if I can get that. This is in fact only the matching. Let me see whether I have got the Rietveld refinement here. No. No, I don't see Rietveld refinement here. Priya was good at that. Anyway, even if we nowadays open randomly a paper, we'll get examples of that. Yes, this is it, Rietveld refinement. So what is done is that point by point, you plot the differences in the intensity of our XRD pattern and the standard pattern, and then we get a graph of this type. So we change the parameters. It means that program changes the parameter in such a way that some of these differences will be minimum. So this is the observed pattern, and then this black one is the calculated pattern. So this is the difference between the observed and the calculated. And these are the Bragg positions. Wherever the lines are there, these are marked by the positions. So this type of graph is generated by the program Foolproof. So we can get the Rietveld refinement. Then quite often, in the Rietveld refinement, people try to obtain the particle size. But for that, we need really very, very good measurements. So these XRD methods are really popular due to they are quite less costly. In fact, if you get you can get it for a few hundred rupees. You can get the XRD patterns. Now people try to calculate the width from the width of this XRD, the particle size, but this is not correct because there can be broadening because of the instrument parameter also, and this is the average particle size. So this method is really not correct. In several papers, I will find that they have calculated particle size from the XRD methods. This is not a correct method. And they use Scherer formula for measuring the crystal diameter or particle size. In this case, this B is the full width at the maximum, but this is the actually difference in the width of the bulk and your sample. So for that we must have a standard pattern, and from that only we can measure. So in good experiment, this is how it is done, that you measure for the standard and then you measure for the experimental and so on. So then only we can calculate the crystallite size. And then we need really monochromatic XRD beam. Very often we use copper K alpha line, and then it has got two components at least. There could be three in fact. So it is very difficult to separate K alpha and K beta. And then K alpha itself has got two components. So if we have not separated the components, then line will be broad. So if we want to calculate the particle size, then we have to use Warren-Auerbach formula, not the Scherer formula. So anyway, this is besides the point. So once we have done that, if we really want to find out the particle size, then there are other methods. Anyway, so once we have obtained the XRD matching, next thing is describing the crystal structure. Now this crystal structure can be described with help of a software which is Vesta. Vesta is again a free software, and we can use this software to make very beautiful diagrams depicting the structure of the crystal. So I will try to demonstrate that also. So for that, we need a standard CIF file, crystallographic information file. Once we have got that file, then we can use that software Vesta. So Nilesh, is this screen visible? You can see the
Yes,
Vesta?
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, it's
Ah,
visible.
okay, okay, nice. So what we have to get is we have to obtain the crystallographic information file. This could be available, from literature, or what we can find is that such file might be available from this website, crystallography.net. So, for example, I will show you how to obtain CIF file. So, I will go to this website. Crystallography.net. So in this case, I can search. For example, I want a CIF file for say material KMGF3. Then I will add here, I want K, I want MG, I want F. And I may get a rubbish, so I restrict it to that I want only 3. Let us see what we get. So from this, I may get a file. Yes, KMGF3. This is a CIF file. So what I will do, I will download this file. So once I have downloaded this file, then I am ready, in fact. So I can open this file in Vesta. File, I will open this file. So I can get this type of file. So Vesta will plot crystal structure for me. Then I can adjust this. I can change the objects. For example, this K, I can change the color, or I can change the size. So this way I can play with it and I can get my model. Then it shows various types of bonds. So this is my potassium atom. I can see that it has got the coordination of 12. Now I can find out from the crystal structure file of KMGF3 the description and whether this description is correct or not. So I can edit the bonds. Okay. I can edit the objects. And I can also edit the bonds. So then I get this type of diagram. So I can rotate it. Then I will select the picture, where visibility is good. So I can clearly see here magnesium atom. So this magnesium, this has got the coordination 6, and this is the potassium atom. This has got the coordination of 12. So from this angle, picture looks very good. I can also get another type of picture. If this is too much, I mean there are many atoms, then what I will do, it is still not showing perhaps the unit cell. So let me get the unit cell also. There are many options available, and I can play with this. So still I do not see the unit cell. Why unit cell is not seen, I don't know. Style, ball and stick. Okay. Now I can also reduce the size. If there are too many atoms, then what I will do, I can choose the size of the unit cell, the boundaries. I can make the boundaries smaller. So I can get only K and mg, 1K, 1 mg. And I can also now see the unit cell, isn't it? So unit cell, I'm seeing. Yes. So this is the unit cell, and these are the positions of potassium atom and Mg atom. So only one atom at a time. Then I can also plot what are the polyhedra. So these are the coordination polyhedra. So I find that this is a sort of a tubectohedron, whereas this has got a pyramidal shape, or a tetrahedron, simple octahedron, and so on. So I can get various types of shapes using the software Vesta, and these figures look very beautiful. If you can also change the color. So very nice way of showing the crystal structure. This is crystal structure of KMGF3. From Vesta, we can export this. So we can export the image as a TIFF file or as a JPG file. So once I have got it, I can edit it further in the Paint. And then I can label them. For example, I will label various types of atoms. So I will draw these atoms here. This was, potassium atom. And then we had the magnesium atom. So I will show this is the magnesium atom. And this is the fluorine atom. So this way I will show fluorine. Then I will choose this, bring it here. And then I can make it of proper size. So my diagram is ready. These are the polyhedra, the coordination, everything is shown in this diagram. So with help of Vesta, I can explain that yes, I have prepared KMGF3 material. This has got cubic structure where this potassium has got coordination of 12. It is bound to 12 fluorine ions or atoms, whereas magnesium is bound to 6 fluorine atoms. And this completes, the description, right from formation to the XRD matching to the description of the crystal structure. This is complete. So as I told you, that particle size, etc., I won't advise you to use XRD matching. But next particle size you can also use, there is a dynamic laser scattering, DLS, that gives you very good particle size distribution, or there is also a method known as PET surface. So that will give you proper particle size distribution. These facilities again are not available everywhere, but at certain places like say NIRI or at IITs, this DLS system is there and we can get particle size distribution. This tells you, how many particles, in what range the particles are there and so on. So it's better to use that facility. If I get a particle size distribution, then well and good, yes. No, this is not the original one. Original one is by DLS. So DLS is a different type of thing. I don't know. I will try to find out if I have got original graph. I don't seem to be having it here. Okay, somewhere in fact I might have shown. Just now I'm not able to locate it. But suffice it to say that this particle size distribution we can get by dynamic laser scattering or bed surface. That is the best way. So after that we study electron microscopy. That is another important thing. So we can also study the contents of our material by energy dispersive X-ray. So we can carry out the elemental analysis by energy dispersive X-rays. We can have the micrographs same, then EDAX and the elemental mapping. This is what we can do. So let me see. Yeah, I talked to you about the Rietveld. This is how Rietveld is done. Then we wanted EDAX. So this is what we get, percentages of various elements we get in EDAX. So this type of uh, spectra we get intensity versus the energy. And then each line is characteristic of certain element. For example, I get here, this is the aluminum, this is oxygen, this is magnesium, this is barium, this is europium. So the compound I tried was BAMG Al10O17, and then this is the atomic ratio. So this ratio matches fairly well with the formula BAMG Al10O17. So EDAX will also give me that thing. Another method is also JANES. It can give me information about the valencies. Yes, I was telling you about the particle size distribution. So particle size distribution, we get this type of graph that various particles sizes and how many particles are in that range. This is not what we get from XRD, but we get it from DLS. So this type is needed. So this is a typical scan electron micrograph. This tells you about the morphology. what sort of particles are there. In this case, they are rather of random shape, but sometimes the grain growth, there could be hexagonal or platelets or spherical particles and so on. And then EDX I had already showed you. And whether your activator is homogeneously distributed or not, this is also obtainable using elemental mapping that is available with SAME. So we get this type of spectra. In fact, these color are artificial. These are not, the barium is not blue color and europium of some greenish yellow color and oxygen red color. These are just for depicting, for making a graphical presentation. Different colors are used for different element. And what we see here is that, yes, this barium, and in this case we have doped europium. So this is fairly uniformly distributed. So it is not that activator is only at one place and it is not distributed throughout. So by doing the elemental mapping, we know how homogeneously the activator is distributed within the phosphor. So this elemental mapping, this is important. So the micrograph tells you about the morphology, what shape of particles are there. Then EDAX tells you about the elemental composition of material, which element and what are their relative percentages. For example, if I take KMgF3, then there are how many atoms? 3 fluorine, 1 magnesium, 1 potassium. So I will find that 20% is potassium, 20% is magnesium, and 60% is fluorine. By EDAX, I find out. And if I get figures close to 20, 20, 60, then I will say yes. I had attempted KMgF3, and the EDAX analysis also vouches to the fact that it was KMgF3. Then europium, is it uniformly distributed? Then elemental mapping will tell me whether the activator is uniformly distributed or not. Then the particle size distribution, as I told you, and bed surface. These are the methods for getting what size particles you have found by your method. Then more important, in fact, all these are peripherals, but nowadays these are asked that nobody will just trust you. They want you to show the results. So all these results are needed. Added to that, sometimes there is also, certain methods like FTIR, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. Now, this spectroscopy is important, for molecular groups. For example, if I am making a silicate, then there are various types of silicate. I have got metasilicate, SiO3, or I have got orthosilicate, or I have got pyrosilicate. Now, all these silicates, they have got characteristic infrared absorption. So infrared spectra will tell me which group is formed. So if I am attempting, say, a compound Ca2SiO4, then I will see in the infrared spectra this SiO4 group frequencies. If there is some impurity metasilicate form, then I will also get spectrum corresponding to SiO3. Or there is some Ca2Si2O7 form, then I will see in the FTIR spectra this Si2O7 also. So whenever I am preparing this type of compounds, even borate for that matter. In borate, again there could be BO2, B2O5, BO4, and various types of oxyanions are possible. So all these can be identified using FTIR. But if I'm having, say, KMgF3, then there is no point in doing FTIR because there are not such groups, Fluorine is an just atom. And then I'm not having various types of groups. But in many oxide type of materials, various oxygen may exist in various configuration, and such molecules or molecular ions may exist. So for identifying such molecular ions, I can use FTIR. So it will again confirm that yes, I have found whatever phase I wanted, either metasilicate, pyrosilicate, or the orthosilicate, and so on. So FTIR is useful for identifying the molecular groups, not the structure, but only the molecular group. Then we come to the real measurements. In fact, most of nearly our research is centered around the luminescence or photoluminescence. So in this case, what we do, we find out the excitation spectra and emission spectra. Then we measure the Stokes shift. So typically, I may get photoluminescence spectra, something like this. So I get emission spectrum, then I obtain excitation spectrum, then I calculate what is the width of the emission spectrum, and sometimes if I want to resolve these components, then I may carry out analysis using some softwares. So I can resolve them in sort of Lorentzian peaks, and each I can see here one peak, second, third, fourth, five. There are at least 5 peaks. Then I use some software for resolving these 5 peaks and calculate their relative intensities. Then I calculate the Stokes shift. Stokes shift is the difference between the emission wavelength and the longest wavelength excitation. So from that, I can obtain the Stokes shift. So emission spectrum, excitation spectrum, Stokes shift, such parameters I can obtain from the photoluminescence, recorded photoluminescence spectra. Then, if this is a lanthanide, then I may analyze the spectra in terms of Judd and Opelt theory. So I have not done this much, but there is a theoretical analysis. There are some software also available. In fact, Rupesh today only was telling me that using MATLAB, he has developed a program which will give Judd Opelt analysis of the photoluminescence spectrum. So these are the say standard methods and expected from you whenever you are presenting the results. If we are studying luminescence of 3D transition elements, then we calculate the Raka parameters. Now, yesterday I have to
Hello, sir. You are not audible.
so these are the Raka parameters. So I have put a program like this that give the wavelength. This is the first excitation band. This is the second excitation band. This is the emission peak. Then the rest of the things, these are converted to centimeter raised to -1. Then using the formula, I calculate dq. I calculate b, that is equal to dq. Then I calculate the parameter Raka parameter B and Raka parameter C. So we have made a sort of program in Excel. So experimental data is only these two things. the first excitation band, that is the high energy excitation band, low energy excitation band position of that, and the emission peak. So we can do the Raka parameters from this. So just to give you an idea about this, so this is the PL, right? This is the photoluminescence for Cr3 plus. So this is my high energy excitation band. Position is around 410. This is my second excitation band. So position is 560 nm. And this is the emission of chromium, that is around 693 nm. So I just put these three values in Excel sheet. So I will put this value as say 410, then this value as 550, emission wavelength as 700 or 510. This is say 560 and this is 693. So as soon as I put these values, I get the results. I get the value of B and C. So this is my Raka parameter B. This is my Raka parameter C. This is 3217 centimeter raised to minus 1. This is the Raka parameter 636 centimeter raised to minus 1. Not only that, I also get difference from the free ion value delta B and difference from the of C from the free ion value. So knowing these differences, I can have further interpretation. There can also be another type of measurement made in the photoluminescence experiment itself. We can calculate the reflectance spectra. So this is the reflectance spectra I can get in my instrument. So this gives me idea about the optical absorption. And if the absorption corresponds to conduction band and valence band, then I can also get the values of the band gap from this. So this is also possible, getting the band gap. So for that, I can get the band gap values. This is the reflectance spectra. Then I make a TOC plot. This is known as TOC plot. So I plot SC upon lambda versus this FR, and then I can get the band gap value. So using the reflectance spectra, it is possible to estimate the band gap, and whether band gap is direct or band gap is indirect, that I can find out. Yes, this is the TOC plot. So from this, I can calculate the band gap value as say 4.6 electron volt. So this is one additional measurement from reflectance spectra. Incidentally, I also made an Excel file for calculating band gap. So how to have top plot. So I have made a small program in Excel. So you just put those values and then you obtain the band gap from that. Now we are talking about the photoluminescence. So these are some of the parameters. As I told you, Raka parameter you can calculate. There is also the temperature dependence can be discussed and half width of the emission excitation bands. This can be discussed in terms of what are known as Huang risk factors. Also, if we measure the concentration quenching, then from that we can obtain the critical distance for the energy transfer. I think I have yesterday showed you that formula for critical distance. Then we can also plot the lifetime. So for lifetime, in fact, we get this type of curves. We get intensity as a function of time after the excitation is stopped. So usually we get this type of decay curve. And if it is exponential, what we do? We plot ln of I by I0 against time, and then slope of this line gives me the lifetime. In this case, it is obtained as 3.5 millisecond. This is lifetime for the chromium. Now, in millisecond range, we can plot the lifetime in the apparatus available at Nagpur itself. But if it is nanosecond or microsecond even, then we have to take help from outside, either at IIT or Pune University or Delhi University, and then we get, yes, this is the lifetime for the European. So this is what I have, these measurements I have taken from Pune. So only European lifetime was 1205 nanosecond. If I dope with chromium, then lifetime is shortened 720 nanosecond. And from that I can calculate energy efficiency or efficiency of energy transfer. This can be obtained. So there are certain formulae known as Paulose formulae. So in case of Paulose formulae, I can get right. From Paulose formulae, I can get the energy efficiency. I can calculate that. I will use Paulose formula for getting the lifetime. This is the Paulose formula. So this is the Paulose formula. Here, the lifetime with activator, this is lifetime, rather without a activator, and this is the lifetime. without activator. This is lifetime of the sensitizer without activator. With activator, without activator. And 1 minus this ratio, that gives the efficiency of energy transfer. So this I can get. Now, sometimes this lifetime curve is not exponential curve, but it may contain several components and so on. In that case, we use Inokoti-Hiroyama equation. So that equation has to be used. Inokoti-Hiroyama. This equation we have to use, and then from that we can get analysis of the lifetime. So I think we'll have to make some short programs for solving these equations also, so that we just put in experimental values and we get the analysis. So developing such small programs will be quite helpful to the group. So those who know some programming, handling MATLAB, etc., I request them to undertake this activity also. Some programs, I mean, some small things I could do in Excel also, but Excel may not always be sufficient. So this is regarding the photoluminescence analysis. Apart from that, we may have we can calculate color coordinates. So for color coordinates, there are some programs available. This is Radiant Imaging Color Calculator 2.0. So this program enables you calculation of color coordinate. Now, after all, what are color coordinates? Then these color coordinates, they tell you precisely quantification of the color. Otherwise, what we say, red, green, this, that is only qualitative. But we need to have a quantification of the color coordinates. So this also we have done. And there are certain programs. So this tells you that this is the color coordinate of our phosphor. So from this diagram, we can find out that yes, it is emitting in greenish yellow region. So actually, this calculation, these are based on the tricolor vision. Human vision is tricolor vision. Means how do we distinguish different colors? In our eyes, there are 3 receptors, one for the blue, one for the green, and one for the red. So our vision is RGB vision, red, green, blue vision. So for any color, we find out how much is the red component, how much is the green component, and how much is the RGB, red, green, blue component. So we take the relative values, normalize them to 1, that total of 3 will come to 1. These are known as the tri-stimulus values, X, Y, and Z. Now since total is 1, giving only 2 is sufficient. There is no need to give third. For example, I am given here the coordinate X is equal to 0.441, Y is equal to 0.534. So total is 0.975. Hence, the Z coordinate is 0.025. There is no need to give Z coordinate. So this type of graph we obtain. So the blue color will be somewhere here. So that X RGB, isn't it? So X is very small. Green value is also very small. And blue will be nearly 1. So you find here x is very small, y is 0. So the blue will be about 0.85 or something. So this corner is blue. Similarly, if I am talking about green color, then I find that y coordinate is nearly zero point 0.8 and this x coordinate is about 0.1. So z coordinate is 0.1. That's all. So this is a green. So if I take this corner, red color, then I find that x is a very high, about zero point 0.7 or something. Y is 0.25 and Z will be 0.05. So no blue component here. This is red. So this is called as the color triangle. So using the concept of color triangle and the concept of this tricolor vision, we can calculate this color coordinate using the program color calculator 2, that is the software. Incidentally, a simpler program is also given, by IIT Kharagpur students, and that program is really very good. So in fact, that program is better. I will try to find out if I can get that. Yes, GOCIE, GoCIE. This is another program. So on IIT Kharagpur website, you will get this GoCIE program. And all these are free of cost. So either using GoCIE or the color calculator 2.0, we can calculate color coordinates. And there are various other factors also, color purity and so on. So once you get the color coordinates, from that you can calculate many parameters, color purity and gamut and so on. Now, there are also other types of luminescence experiment. For example, thermoluminescence. In case of thermoluminescence, we obtain the glow curve, then we analyze it in terms of trapping parameters. Usually, we can use chain equations. Or we can also analyze the glow curve in terms of various peaks. So we can again decompose it. Then we can also study thermoluminescence, emission spectrum. Similarly, for optical stimulated luminescence, again we can study the various components by decomposing the decay curve. So from OSL decay, we can get various components and analyze them. So there are certain methods. In fact, Rujuta has done a lot of work on OSL and OSL decay. Also, Yogesh More, he has also done. So these are some standard methods for analyzing thermoluminescence results and optically stimulated luminescence results. So these are some of the, tools which we have. These tools can be used, and these are sort of routine. These are the routine way of analyzing the data, and most of the time we'll be dealing with this kind of data, that XRD matching, Rietveld refinement, crystal structure, then FTIR or electron microscopy, and then of course the top plot, the reflectance spectra, then excitation emission spectra, from which we can use these type of methods and the software. So I think that is all I had to tell you today.